You are listening to Just a Cup on Bleav, an organic conversation with the world's greatest athletes. Today we have Jack Green. So make sure you like, subscribe, throw a comment in there. Would love to have you do that. As we talk to Jack, you've kind of really post that, say, situation in 2012 with yourself from the mental side. You've really kind of dove headfirst into the human performance side of sports. You launched your own company. I mean, you're a great entrepreneur. You're starting companies. You got Olwell,
yeah.
WEL, which is a consulting company. But then you have Taser, which is, and I'll make sure I say this right, the Athlete Sustanabilty Report. Talk to me a little bit about Taser, because it's fascinating, kind of looking up some of the research. I'm kind of a tech kind of nerd when it comes to athletics. Describe what that company is all about.
So Taser is essentially everything I wish I had when I was that athlete was struggling, when I didn't have that support, right? Same when I coach. I'm pretty much, everything in my life is like, I'm just trying to help the young Jack. That's the reality. And I know that happens with a lot of us, and it's a lot of our fire, our fuel, right? So Taser, the Athlete Sustainability Report, comes from the fact that I went into workplace wellbeing. So I was the global wellbeing lead at BBC and responsible for 30 offices globally, over 10,000 people. Did that during COVID. How do we create better environments for our employees? And using a lot of my sporting and coaching lessons. And then I went into the tech world and software startups and basically providing workplace wellbeing assessments, content into businesses. So I went on both sides, internally supporting people, but then externally as a provider. And then I just thought, I miss sport and I love sport. It's all I think about. It's every hobby I have. Doesn't matter what the sport is. Like, I just want to be involved. And I was like, I think sport is really missing a trick here. We're so obsessed with data around physical performance. Yet I know full well the personal effects are professional. I know if I'm struggling at home, at some point that's going to affect me on the track or on the field or on the court, wherever it might be. Yet we don't have the data on that. We don't have the information. So with Taser, I was like, can I bring validated assessments by academic professionals on everything outside of sport, mental health, financial well-being, opinion on culture and leadership, opinion on your own performance, team performance, coach performance? Can I bring these validated assessments that are short, easy for athletes to do it through an app, through technology, makes it scalable. We then give all of that data to an organization. It's all anonymous and aggregated so that we're protecting athletes first and foremost, because athletes aren't talking because they're afraid of getting a new contract, of not being selected, of just the stigma, the judgment, right? So can we provide answers that are basically like 70% of your squad are saying they're struggling with financial well-being and it's impacting their performance or causing high stress? Then we know we're protecting individuals, but giving an insight to that environment. And then for the athletes, can we be proactive and preventative? So they get all of their data, but we also have referral pathways into either internal support or external approved support as well. So for me, it's just like, let's improve environments, because I know there's a better way to win. And I know that if we value the human being, then we reduce the noise and minimize the risk of a dip in performance. And this is all just basically just came from me, right? It wasn't the professional side of me that was a problem. It was a personal side. And I still think I could have been one of the best athletes in the world ever, not just in the world at the time. I've got physical capabilities to have been Olympic champion, world champion, but that was stopped because of the personal. Can I help others kind of navigate that rather than go through what I went through? So that's Taser. We're predominantly working in the UK in soccer and football, but definitely seeing lots of opportunities out in North America, especially on that collegiate scene, to be able to help people.
Oh, I mean, how many athletes do you think, as a coach, a lot of times it's said, it's mental, but we don't really do a whole lot for it. It's, well, let's help them recover a little bit more. Let's help them in the weight room, on the track, whatever it might be. How many athletes do you think, or have you seen, people you've trained with, that were uber talented, but just couldn't get out of their own way?
The majority. Right, I can tell you more athletes like that than have done well, right?
Right.
Or ones that you're just like, I don't understand why this isn't working. Like, you've got everything there, and yet coaches, people haven't taken the time to try and support these people and take them beyond just what happens in their sport. And that's where I just think that we've got so many people with so much ability, with the ability to change their lives and then impact others as well. And yet we just kind of discard them because, well, they're not the package we need. They're not the right fit here mentally or personally or within their social life status, whatever it might be. So why wouldn't we support these people? And if you support these people, they're even more, when they feel valued, they're going to train better anyway. They're going to perform better anyway. And you've got that connection. How many coaches have you met that aren't actually that great, but they have such a great connection with their athletes that it works, right?
There's a lot.
Does that happen?
I remember me traveling the world talking to coaches. I would sit there and go, how in the world? Because you'd know what they did training wise. You'd say, how in the world are those kids running that fast? I mean, it's complete garbage from a physiology standpoint. But those athletes would run through a wall for that person because they knew that they cared about him genuinely and everything, and they were there for him. I mean, it's a huge part of coaching that a lot of people fail at.
But it's never taught, right? So every coaching qualification is, let's look at the methodology, periodization, technical, tactical, whatever it might be. But do we have anything there around looking after human beings, around relationships, communication? No. Yet, actually, I am, as a coach, my athletes probably spend the most time with me compared to anyone else. And I have the most conversations with me, and I will be the most or one of the most important people in their lives. So I have a responsibility here to care for them, support them, and be able to have a safe environment for us both to work in.
I mean, I read a study at one point in time that an individual in their collegiate years, it was geared towards the United States, that the 4 years that they compete in college, their coach spends more quality time with them than their parents had up to that point, which is mind-blowing. But when you sit and think about it, it makes a lot of sense, because your typical quality time with your parents is up to maybe like 10 or 11, 12 years old. And then you want to get away from your parents and you don't want to be around your parents. And who do you go to? Probably your coach or your teacher or somebody that, whether it's in music or sport, whatever it might be, you're with that person, having quality time, conversations. So, I mean, the mentorship side of a coach or, a leader at that age is massive. I mean, it's absolutely massive. And you have a lot of ones that aren't very good.
Yeah, but yet we're still just like, oh, they're good with people, they're not. And right. Hold on, it's the same way if you went into any business. Yeah, someone might not be as good naturally as managing people, but you'd still help them to manage better.
Right.
But we don't do that in sport.
When you were going through your situation with depression and so forth, was there athletes that came to you directly and said thank you, or from other sports or other people? Did it bring some awareness to some other individuals that you might never thought, hey, this might have helped?
So I went public after 2013 because I tried to run that year and I was useless, right?
Right.
I couldn't finish races and I just wasn't in a good place. And I'm very open and honest, if people haven't realized already. So when I was being asked like what's wrong, it was kind of like, I just need to put this out there because it feels like I don't like hiding things.
Right.
Don't work that way. So I was like, I put it out there. In hindsight, I regret it at the time because it damaged me as an athlete. It damaged I was seen as a liability. I was seen as damaged goods because it was very early days. And I don't think I was probably the only active athlete at that time to be public about it. There were lots that had retired and spoken about it, but not actually still competing. But I was seen as damaged goods. So now it's great. I've got a second career. I'm able to help lots of people, hopefully help people at the time. But I cannot tell you how many people came and spoke to me. Some of the best athletes in the world with Olympic titles, medals, world titles, world record holders who are like, yeah, I struggle. But they didn't feel comfortable enough or safe enough. Not that everyone has to share, but they didn't feel comfortable enough or safe enough to share that at all. And I just think that's really sad, because especially because I was struggling, and I struggled for a long time because I didn't believe mental health existed. I thought it was an excuse for people that just weren't destined to go do great things, or were too lazy to do great things, whatever it might be. Yeah, that's an excuse. But if I'd known it was like, oh, even people who are successful can struggle, I might have been able to take that a lot easier. But we'd created an environment which still is prevalent to a degree, not as much. Things are much better now, which is great. But we still have an environment where it's just like, no, it's masculine, can't show weakness. That's it. So people don't feel comfortable sharing.
It's so sad that you see that you were honest, but it was looked upon at the time as a liability. And I can understand, or I not understand necessarily. I can see from a business standpoint that one of the shoe companies or somebody be like, well, how are we going to be able to count on him? I mean, because that's what they're looking at. Are we going to be able to count on him in the next championship, to promote our shoes? But it's honestly, it's sad that somebody can be honest about how they are in a current state, because we all ride roller coasters. I would be the first one to admit I've had some really, really high points, and I've had some really, really low points. And anybody has that. Everybody has situations in life where they're on a high and then there's when they're on the low. And the goal is always to try to help somebody when they're at their lowest point get back up to a high point. And there's, I mean, how many issues of people become homeless and lose their jobs, and there's just all kind of situations, get divorced. I mean, you could just name countless number of things that if somebody would have taken time and listened, it might have averted it.
I think the reality, Brian, is they say 1 in 4 people will struggle with some kind of mental health issue during their lifetime. That increases to 1 in 3 in what is considered high pressure or performance environments. Yet I was the only athlete in an Olympic team who apparently had a mental health issue. So just, yeah. And also I think the other point is, if you can't share, if you have to hold things back, if you can't be yourself, right, you're never going to go and perform to the best of your ability, because you're not free. You're not able to let loose, right? If I'm always holding something, then I'm always just the idea of who I'm meant to be, rather than actually just going out there and having fun and just letting everything come out 100%. And that's essentially how I was for a lot of my career, was, right, I've got to be this way, but that way wasn't me. And that definitely held me back to a degree. And I think that's the same with any sharing. That doesn't have to be around mental health, right? If you're not comfortable being you, then how are you ever going to be 100% of what you can be?
Do you think there's been improvements with the team space and just in sport in general in the last 14 years? Or last?
Oh, but a million percent wise, yeah, things have improved. I think COVID has accelerated a lot around mental health in particular. We see that in workplaces, though we still have gone back to certain ways of just like, we're all good now. COVID's not affecting a huge majority of us anymore, so we're all fine. We'll go back to normal. But yeah, definitely seeing improvements because society has improved, but sport's always a little bit behind society on these kind of things, right? Taking a while to catch up because we are such a ruthless, brutal kind of industry, and because we've always got a conveyor belt of people who want to be in it, right? So if we lose people, it's okay, because there's always someone that will come in, and everyone's got a short shelf life anyway, which is a horrible way to think about it. Instead of just like, how do we maximize these people with the short shelf life, and how do we make this experience the best experience and get the most out of them? But that's a whole different thing than what I'm passionate about, obviously.
That's such a fascinating analogy of how sports are as a conveyor belt. Because it really is. I mean, there's always going to be somebody coming. There's always going to be somebody trying to be on top. And doesn't matter what sport it is, doesn't matter what level, whether it's, youth or, secondary or college or professional, the conveyor belt is really, that's you need to like brand that, market that a little bit, the conveyor belt of sports.
But it is, isn't it? It's just, It doesn't stop. Whether you're on it or not, it's going. And that can be a hard thing when you retire, right? It's the thing you've given your whole life to. And you would have felt this probably in a coaching aspect as well. You give your whole life to it. It's everything. You step away and it's not reciprocated, right? Cool. Next coach is in. Next moment, it's off.
It's funny. And it's funny. We talked about this before, about being an Olympian. Once you're an Olympian, you're always an Olympian. And that's what people remember you by. As a coach, yesterday, I haven't coached, directly in athletics in 5 years. And there's a guy that lives near us that said, "Hey, coach," he never knew me as a coach, but he knows that's what I did. So it's the stigma of, hey, you're once a coach, you're always a coach if you did it for a long time. As you've transitioned out of the athlete world and into the business world and helping athletes, does that open more doors, you think, for people to listen? And when you start talking about the performance side of things, because you were an Olympian, because you were an elite athlete, does that help kind of open the door a little bit?
100%. I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing right now had I not had the career I had. Because the other thing is, right, in your environment, when you're a sports person, when you're in a sporting environment, everyone is. I remember not thinking an Olympian was that great a thing, because everyone I knew was an Olympian. And then loads of people I knew were actually Olympic medalists and Olympic champions and world champions. I was like, I'm not very special, right? And It's not until you step out that you're like, oh, not many people actually did what I did, that then it becomes special, right? And then it helps. I'm quite happy to use it to open doors. It's something that's interesting to people, and particularly in a business environment, to learn from sports people, because we are the cutting edge of how do you find the 0.01 of a second that's going to help you win something, right? We are the ones that can unlock those lessons in mindset, behavior, and actions. So use it all the time. It opens the doors. And same with the new business. Like, if someone else was coming into this sports tech world trying to support athletes with the holistic health and human performance, but they had no Olympics behind them or something, they wouldn't get to open the doors with the likes of Man City or others, right? Whereas I can go and say, I was one of you. I'm part of the family. And also, when I talk about this and that this is important of what happens outside of the sport, I'm not just saying this as someone who worked in human resources, who you'd expect to say it, or someone like outside of this. I'm not the normal person to talk about well-being, and I'm telling you it's important. And if I'm telling you it's important, I'm hanging my hat on it. There's probably a reason why, because I come from the other side.
It's amazing. You just mentioned that sports is such a fraternity, sorority. Once you're in, you're in. And
it's hard to get in.
it's amazing when you think about it. Some of my closest friends, I never coached basketball a day in my life. Well, I guess I did when I was in college, but that's student teaching. It's not really coaching. But most of a lot of my close friends are basketball coaches, because I met them along the way and we become friends for whatever it might be. But that fraternity and sorority of sport is an amazing thing. And it never ends.
There's very few sporting environments, doesn't matter what sport, that I can't have a conversation with someone and it's a genuine conversation. And I've been into lots of soccer teams, Premier League and so on, and environments. There's North American teams across football, basketball, baseball, that just are happy to open the door because you're one of them. It's a huge positive to being in sport, and something that I value highly, and I'm very grateful for, because in many ways, as we said, sport moves on without you, but at the same time it doesn't. It's just in a different way. So really grateful to still have that connection in some form, even if it's not being the athlete myself.
What's next? expanding the taser around the world, or what's kind of the next venture step?
Yeah, pretty much. So with Taser, it's just how do we support as many teams, organizations, as many athletes as possible. So we've already translated into 6 different languages, which is really cool, makes us successful. There aren't many tech platforms that do that. We decided from early doors, needed to do it straight away because the companies I've been involved with before, it's always a limiting factor, was, are you a global organization? Well, yes, we are. What languages do you have? Well, we only have English. And when you look at the likes of the Premier League in soccer, there's something like 30, 40 different nationalities, right? So how can I say we're supporting people directly and really caring about the athlete if we can't meet them where they are? So yeah, we've done that so that we can be global and hopefully just make a difference in sport. Where I really want this to go is, let's take the data we collect, that data around mental health and well-being, let's start connecting that up with the physical performance data and the results, and we can start then to put well-being and holistic health and human performance in this return on investment, this really important need to have a priority, because we're able to see that when people are struggling at home with X, Y, and Z, whether that's relationships, whether that's around the culture and leadership that they see in their environment, we see that when that's poor, there's a higher risk of injury or they start performing worse. That's where we get the coin to really, the penny will drop, and it's right, this is important that we look after our people because they will go and perform well. That's where I want us to go. I then just do my keynotes and various things to keep talking around mental health and have opportunities to work within business on that. And yeah, and hopefully, to be honest, Brian, the plans, can I do all this, and that will allow me to do a bit more coaching one day back in track and field, because track and field was my first love, and I want to be involved, and I've got some great skills to bring to the sport.
And I don't think most people outside of, our main listening audience is in the United States, to the show. But we do have a lot in Canada and GB and some other places. But I don't think most people outside the U.S. realize that paid coaching is not a normal thing. In the United States, people make hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars doing it in the U.S. But outside the U.S., there's few and far between. It's a lot of volunteers that have a second job that they're doing it. You may mention you probably spent more on Petro that you did doing, making it. How can companies, how can somebody invest to do a better job of that? Because we said earlier in the show, the role of a coach plays such a vital part in the development of young people. And if you don't have somebody there, it makes it tough.
Yeah, and I think that coach is a mentor, is another kind of parent, is another guardian. I think it makes a huge difference to our society. It makes a huge difference to the young people. It makes a huge difference everywhere if we have those well-informed, strong people in the right places. So I've talked a lot with quite a few other sports around this idea of, why do our best coaches work with the seniors and the first years, and then try and fix athletes that haven't been taught properly or don't have the skills? Why are we putting coaches who are really inexperienced, might not be there yet, or in some cases might not be that great, and we put them with the really moldable development? And you're like, hold on, if we get it right at the start, we don't have to do as much later on. But yeah, I appreciate it's not as simple as that, because we need great coaches everywhere. But
jumped into my brain because I say that all of the time. I don't understand. The best coaches should be with the youngest kids. To teach them fundamentals. I can't. How many times that I received athletes that were super talented, but had some massive technical flaws because they were taught that way. Or not taught at all. They were just pushed out there because it was, some dad or some mom that really didn't know the sport, but nobody else wanted to do it, so they stepped up and did it. But they didn't have the background to teach it correctly.
But that's because our education's poor, and there's also very few opportunities to make it a career. So why should it be a priority for people? That's why you then only get handfuls of coaches that have really gone out of their way and used their own expenses, their own time to really master their craft. My first coach when I was young is one of the best technical coaches I've ever met. Yet she was the mum of an athlete who then just kind of took it on herself and went to where I read every book, watched this.
Right.
And technically, it's absolutely. I used to work with some of the best coaches in the world, as you know. I've worked with some of the best that have ever lived. I'd go back to my hometown to just do like a couple of sessions, and she'd watch and be like, "Why are you doing X, Y, and Z?" And I'd be like, "How have you seen this?" And like, the best coaches haven't. Like, just one of those. But it was her taking the time outside of her job and life to go and learn that, and that shouldn't quite be the way.
That is a true statement and a very positive statement. What is her name? Because I'm getting super curious.
June Plews was her name. So she, just a local coach, like just down in East Kent. And quite frankly, if she was in central London and so on, like she would have ended up. I remember when I joined the group at 14 years old, we had 10 athletes in the group. All 10 were top 10 in the UK for age, and we trained twice a week.
But you trained smart and you had passion, and I think a lot of times coaches overdo coaching. I would be the first one to raise my hand and say, I coached too much. I did way too much early on. I wasted time. I thought more work and hard work was better than smart work.
So on that, Brian, because some of the best coaches, what I've learned from them is they're just like, every year they just take more and more out of their programs, and they're just like, do we need to do this? But there's a huge fear to do that. So the athlete I coached, who ended up winning a world relays title, went to her third Olympics, made the Olympic final, ran a national record for Italy. She was a thoroughbred, right? 100, 200 meter runner. But if she did any more than one or two runs, the wheels would come off and it would be horrendous. So she just needed to do very little and run it fast. But no coach was brave enough to just go, right, we'll go against what the books say or what's expected. I did that and she ended up running fast. But the reason why is because people are too scared that if it goes wrong, the easiest thing to fall back on is saying, well, we did all of this work, so it's not my fault. We did all this work. When actually, no, it is your fault, because was that the right work? And that's what I learned. I started with Malcolm Arnold in Bath, who coached Olympic champions, world record holders. He was, I'm going to destroy you and do so much work that if you survive it, you're an animal, right? That was his program. He taught me how to work hard. I then went to Lauren Seagrave, who is so much about quality. He taught me how to work smart, and he taught me how to coach, right, and how to plan. Yeah. And I just think, actually, I got the same results with both. One, I felt like I barely did anything. One, I felt like I was surviving each day. And then I kind of blend the two, but then also look at the individual and go, well, actually, where do you sit on this spectrum of smart, hard? Yeah. So you're getting me talking about the things I'm really, passionate about.
It's true, because, I mean, you think about, when you think about the textbooks that people start to learn from coaching in, most of the individuals that wrote those textbooks never coached. They're physiologists, or they were scientists in some manner, which don't get me wrong, I'm not speaking bad about scientists and physiologists, because they're super needed. But so much of what coaching was based on book knowledge and not actual practical hands-on knowledge. That, I mean, I'd tell anybody that would hear me, my first 8 years of coaching, I had no idea what I was doing. And I had people win championships. I had people run fast. I had somebody lead the world. I had no idea what I was doing. I was throwing things at a wall, based off of, hey, this is what the book says, this is what the coaches, the manuals say, this is what I've learned. But until you get in there and start learning and realizing that every individual is different, what works for some completely works wrong for others, you just don't know. It takes time. And as a young coach, you're scared to death, because if I screw up, I might not get another chance. Yeah. So, I mean, there's definitely a lot of wisdom with age of coaches and having a variety of coaches. when you get into coaching. I mean, what you just said about Malcolm and Lauren, and I know both of them. They're brilliant people, very successful coach, completely different. And you had the fortunate of having that, where a lot of athletes don't have that opportunity to have very different coaches. They have one coach and they tend to go to another coach that's very similar to that coach.
And that's the thing. So when I was really fortunate in terms of my education to have those contrasting coaches who are both hugely successful, some of the best coaches that have ever been around. Because when I was young and I went to Malcolm at 18 years old, 18, 9, just turning 19, I just thought, well, this is how it's done.
Mm-hmm.
Because I didn't know any different, right? Well, you go into this environment, we've got Jack Green, who's a world champion, European Commonwealth champion. We've got everyone in our group went to Olympics, really great performers. Malcolm's history, obviously, all these guys that have won X, Y, and Z. So I was just like, this is just what we do. This is just how it works to be a professional athlete. And it wasn't until then I stepped out and worked with Lauren out in Florida that I was like, oh, there's a different way to do this, that then piqued the curiosity and the challenge of like, hold on. Because I remember being in that first program and thinking like, how do people do this for 10 years?
Right.
Like thinking like, how do people stay in this? And I'm a beast. Like I'm known for huge kind of work capacity.
Right.
Even I was going, geez, like this is hard. Like it's cool, I'm getting results, but how am I going to keep doing this? So yeah, it's having those different experiences is so important. And you don't have to be an athlete to have that. Just go to different environments. I go into different sporting environments now and just go like, what are they doing? Is there anything I can learn from this? Same with business. Like, what's this business doing? Oh, that's interesting. Could that work where I am? And why do they do that? And I think that's the thing I love most is how do you go into different environments and talk to different people and just see what they do. That doesn't mean you have to take everything that they do, but I'm just my coaching is an accumulation of the coaches I've worked with, taking the bits that I think would work, and then my own experiences. That's the reality, and that's no different with my business life and everything else.
And that is probably a great summation of how life is. I mean, and the ones that do it most successfully from a business standpoint have variety. And they've seen different people do different things. And there it is. But Jack, thank you so much for coming on. This is, I mean, we went kind of all over the place, which typically on the show, that's kind of what we do. But I know that you were a little late getting started because you have a 1-year-old right now, and I know you're gonna have to get back to the 1-year-old, which is that's a whole different level of coaching that I personally have never got to experience.
I am not as good a coach in this capacity, that's for sure. Hopefully I'll improve, but wow, it's a challenge. But she's awesome. She's doing great. So
that's awesome. Well, hey, you've been listening to Just a Cup on Bleav with Brian Fetzer, the host. Today had Jack Green on. Please like, subscribe, and share this podcast and on YouTube. Keep it growing. We got covering a bunch of topics, and hopefully we can continue to keep the move going. Have a great one and be blessed, my friends.